enough for you? Good. Because it gets better. It hurts. One thing that I desire of you, Lord, that will I seek after. That I may dwell in the house of the Lord. Lord, I hope that's true. Help us to make that true. One thing, one simple pursuit. The beatific vision, true beauty, to see you, Jesus. Lord, we know we're trying to learn. It's not a religious thing. It's not the result of great religious exercise. Mind powers, meditative powers, long hours of doing things that make us more holy. But Lord, it's the eyes of the heart being opened. And the recognition that the temple isn't a building or a structure somewhere that we go to. Our very bodies, our very minds and hearts can be that temple, that place where we behold truly, where we see that heaven's never been that far away, where we can enter in even now, in this present place of pain and suffering and hardship and waiting. We can enter into heaven. things of earth are the things we tend to worry about, aren't they? But you know, the things of love, the personal love, the personal connections, love received, love embraced, love extended, though they happen in this world, though they may touch upon the things of this earth, those are all heavenly things. Where have we seen you, Lord? In the least of these. Where loving connections are made. Lord, you've made a way that we can connect with you. And as we turn our eyes toward you, help us to see where we've seen. And help us to remember what we've seen of you in the Gospels. All those beautiful pictures we've been looking at. All the ways in which you talk to people, the way you treat people. Lord, help us to see it. Open our eyes, Lord. We want to see Jesus. We want to see Jesus. To reach out and touch him. To reach out and touch him. Say that we love him. Say that we love him. Open our ears. Open our ears, Lord. Help us to listen. the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Lord, which of us would raise our hands and say, look, look, that's me, the pure of heart. And yet, Lord, you made a way. Not by looking in the mirror, but by looking to you. And seeing the one who will forgive us, the one who wants to forgive us. And not just to forgive and wipe the slate clean, but to transform. To give us hope to do better. To live in a better way. To see you more clearly. And to have the motivation thereby to live in a better way. To not wait to enter into heaven someday, but to enter into the heavenly experiences that we can find even here today. Lord, you love us with an everlasting love. Help us, Lord, to enter into that again this morning. We're blessed to be able to be here in this building, and cool air is something we can all feel. And you look around and see one another, and that's a little bit of heaven, I suppose. It's good. But Lord, help us to go deeper and to see how much more there is to be grateful for. And again, as we look into the gospel record, not just history, but Lord, help us to see it as a living picture, painted on our hearts here again today. Help us to see you as we read together about you. Lord, write it on our hearts. Help us to listen. We want to see Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
It's still a good morning.
Yes.
Let's all wipe our noses. Or at least I will. You'll open your Bibles along with me to the Gospel according to John. John chapter 12 is where we're reading right now. Last Sunday we saw 16 people seated in the same place, and yet they were living on different planes. Different ways in which they looked at things. And though they were all in the same room, and if it was air conditioned, it might have been cool. It was a good place, but they weren't all in a good place. They were experiencing life on different levels, ones in which they themselves would choose. We all have a choice. And there they were in that place, and of course Jesus feasting in heaven even while he was here on earth. You know, Jesus was always in fellowship with the Father. He was always in harmony with heavenly things. He's on the highest plane. He's the greatest of all because he's the servant of all. And then secondly, we saw Mary, who was so very close. She was at his feet. She was pouring out her love, not just pouring out costly perfume. She was pouring out something much more precious. Her love. She loved Jesus so much. And she was just pouring out that love, and even though there was some abuse that was thrown at her on that day, I don't know that she even noticed, because she's just lost in love. Those most lost in love are those most found in heaven, and she's just there, right next to Jesus. And Martha's serving, and this time she's in a lot better place than the last time we saw her, because then she was serving and complaining, looking around, who else is doing what. This time she's just doing what she wants to do, what her heart of love says I should do. And so she's serving, and so she's in a good place. And Lazarus is just lazy and kicked back, and that's a good place too. He'd gone through so much, and there he was, just loving the Lord in his way. But interestingly enough, the 11 apostles were, even though called to a high place, they were functioning at a very low place at that time, because they became blinded by something. Something was stirred up from the bottom. Some of that muck that came up, actually we find out here in John's Gospel, it came from Judas. And even where Judas got it, it's something that Judas didn't manufacture. It's always been in this world. And sadly, Judas was, at least at this time in his life, he was a bottom feeder. He was somebody who was looking at all the shiny things that glittered there, and he was stirring stuff up. And the stuff he stirred up, it had an effect on all the 11 apostles, and they all looked at what Mary was doing.
start becoming busybodies like we all tend to do. Who's doing what? And they see what she's doing, and they all say it's a waste, and they begin to scold her, and ugly stuff. And of course, the saddest of all is Judas, where he was at. So all of that, these 16 people all in the same place, living lives in different ways, and some very close to heaven, some pretty close to hell. But it's the kind of choices that we have every day. And so the disciples were saying in verse 5, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people? Something that seems like, well, why not? Maybe a simple question, but all of the muck and all of the ugliness and all the blinding effect that it had. We looked at that last week. Again, I don't think Mary was moved because her heart was captivated. In love with the Lord, she's not, worried who appreciates what I'm doing right now. It's nice to know Jesus appreciated it. Jesus told the rest of them, be quiet. What she's doing is absolutely precious. And so Mary chooses the great place again. And now we move on to a bigger pool. Now we move on to a bigger pool of people, but it's still the same thing. People living on different planes, people living life in different ways, looking at life in different ways. And verse 9 says, the great multitude, therefore, of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but they came that they might also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. And so here we have this great, this great crowd of people, and they want to see Jesus, but they don't just want to see Jesus, they want to see Lazarus as well. And this big crowd, common crowd, it's the curious crowd, it's the circus crowd. They want to see Jesus, the great showman, and they want to see Lazarus, the greatest show on earth. And this is what they're looking for. And it says that the chief priests, verse 10, they took counsel that they might put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away. They were going away from dependence upon these chief priests, going away from some of the religious ways that things were looked at. They were going away, and they were believing in Jesus. So they thought, so they said. Now, they didn't ask my advice, I wasn't around, but if they hired me as a consultant, if they would invited me to the council and I saw then what I see now, I would have said, guys, don't worry. Don't get all worried about this, because these people are not going very far. You think they're all going away, but you know what? They're not that much different than you. They're not going to go that far. And they're believing in Jesus. You think so? Just wait about a week. By the end of the week, they'll be saying, give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. Many of these same people. So don't get all worried about it. Don't think that this is a crisis. No, it's just about a lot of curious people that want to see Jesus. And this is just a phase. We go through those fads, phases. It's a farce. It looks like it's something, but it's really a whole lot of nothing. But they're getting all worked up. They're getting worried. They're afraid their jobs and their whole worldview is going to be shaken by what's happening. And it says there in verse 12 that on the next day, the great multitude who had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took the branches of the palm trees and they went out to meet him, and they began to cry out, Hosanna, save now. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. And Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it, as it's written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. But these things his disciples didn't understand at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written of him, that they had done these things to him. So they were seeing it, but they weren't really seeing it, not yet. And so the multitude who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead, they were bearing him witness. They're all witnessing. We saw it, we saw it, we saw it. We were there at the graveyard. We witnessed it, we saw it. They're all bearing witness. And for this cause also the multitude went and met him, because they heard that he had performed this sign. You know, we're seeing the signs, we're getting it. Pharisees therefore said to one another, "You see that you are not doing any good. Look, the world has gone after him." You know, this classic scene of the circular firing squad. Everyone's shooting. They're shooting at one another. Each is saying to the other, "You're not doing any good." "Well, you're not doing any good either." And they're saying, "Look, the world has gone after him." And again, if they just asked me to consult, I would have said again, don't get all worked up over what's happening right here. Don't be afraid of this. Don't get all agitated. Don't think your job's on the line. They don't get it. Nobody sees. This is not what it seems to be. You don't need to crucify him. He's not the threat that you think he is, not in the way that you think he is. He's not the Savior that they think he is, not in the way that they think salvation comes. They see him as a political figure. He's the son of David. He's the king of Zion. He's the one that's finally going to deal with these Romans who've been oppressing us so long. But they don't get it. Who sees Jesus? Who knows? Even today, we still call this the triumphal entry. So many places, so many people still see this as a triumphal entry. That's maybe, I think perhaps most of our Bibles, mine does, right there at the top of the page. It's in the Bible, it's got to be true. The triumphal entry. Seems that we still think that that's the way power works. And that's how power comes. It seems that most Christians, at least the noisy ones, the ones that make the most in terms of getting attention, they still seem to think that power comes in political parades. That power comes in pep rallies and getting all worked up about something. And yet here, nice thing about sharing the Bible with folks like you know these stories. And I don't have to go into too much detail to tell you, you know that here, just like at the graveyard, Jesus wept. He cried. If you only knew where this is going. If you only knew the things that make for peace, what peace is really all about. And all of this energy and all this agitation and all of this pep rally stuff that you think, Hosanna, save now. That energy is actually going to be the very thing that within a generation is going to, you fight fire with fire, you're going to get burned big time. That's not who you are. You bring out this kind of power, there's a greater power. Rome will crush you. Rome did crush that city. And Jesus saw all that coming. It should have been obvious. But Jesus, once again, like he did in the graveyard, alongside the tomb of Lazarus, he wept. This isn't a triumphal entry. This is, it's a catastrophe. Look what's happening. And here's the one instance, again, each of the gospel writers paints it a little bit differently. But John, again, points out the fact that Jesus rode upon this colt, this foal of beasts of burden. What John doesn't tell us, and is that Jesus set this all up. He told his disciples, go in, get it. It was something that was miraculous. Here's this animal who's never been trained, never been ridden, and there it is, right where Jesus said it would be. And the owner, rather than saying, "Hey, who are you guys? You're stealing my donkey," the owner just lets it go. And this little donkey's willing to go, and the people put their robes there on the donkey. And John's is a very brief picture, but you guys already understand that you've seen the story. And Jesus chose this day to make a public display of himself. I don't know where else Jesus did that. He just never seemed to do that, to make a public display of himself. Certainly he was a public display on the cross, but others did that to him. He went along with it. But here he actually chose it. He's the artist. He sets up the tableau, the picture of true power. He says, you've got to go get a colt, not a Roman war horse, just a donkey, and not even a grown-up, mature donkey, an untrained one. an unskilled one, an untested one. Go get that little donkey, and that's where I'm going to sit. And all of that was a picture of true power. This humble creature upon which the Lord sits. And this is where power sits, and this is how power progresses through this world. But again, people didn't see it. They saw it. Everyone saw it. And they cheered it, but they didn't see it. Without bit or bridle, without force, without pushing, without making this humble creature do anything, the creature's willing to do. And Jesus is willing to work with them. That's the picture. But again, who sees it at that time? Who sees it still today? Where's it being preached right now? Which mega churches are making that the main message? Who would go if they did? How mega would they be? But that's the picture. That's the truth. And the message is very clear there in verse 15. It's fear not. Fear not, daughter of Zion. You know, women, especially daughters, didn't have a whole lot of powers. No political power, no military power, not a whole lot of strength at all. And yet he says to the daughter of Zion, don't be afraid. Why? Because your king is coming seated on a donkey's colt. Because he's coming in this way. Don't be afraid. That's the message. Just like the gospel, the good news. The message is, don't be afraid. I'll give you his message again here today, folks. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear not, little flock. Your heavenly Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. And I'll add to that, you can enter into it today. You know, even in this place, you can just, wherever you're going to be today, you can live on a different plane. Really appreciating, really seeing the things that are truly heavenly. And really being a part of truly heavenly things. The message is, don't be afraid. Fear is a powerful motivator. That's why people use it all the time. Fear will wake you up and get you going and have you move in mass. You can draw a crowd, you can move a crowd. Fear is a tremendous fight or flight. Fear will do that, but you can't live on adrenaline. There are times, of course there are times when we need to do something. But ultimately we're called to rest in his love, to do something a little bit more like Mary did on that day. To choose the better part, is to sit at his feet, or to do like the little donkey did. Just let him be at rest in our lives. And we rest where he rests. He rests in the Father's love, always, wherever he's at. Even on that day, he wept, he was moved, but he wasn't shaken and agitated. He knew he would win. He always knows he will win. Don't be afraid, is the message. Now it says in verse 20 that there were certain Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. And these therefore came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee. And they began to ask Jesus, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Now, things are starting to change. And these non-believers, these Gentiles, these Greeks, they come up and they're not saying, maybe it was a part of it, but it doesn't seem like they're part of the circus crowd. They're certainly not cheering him because he's the son of David, because these guys are Greeks. They're outside the chosen circle. At least that's the way it was seen. But they're attracted to Jesus, and they want to see Jesus. And they come up to Philip because I would imagine Philip is approachable. Yay, Philip. Philip is from Galilee. He's used to non-believers. He's used to foreigners. He's used to strangers. He's willing to talk to them. They're willing to talk to him. And so they come with this request. We want to see Jesus. And so it says in verse 22, Philip came and he told Andrew. And then the two of them together, Andrew and Philip, came and they told Jesus. And that's just, a lovely picture of what to do when new things are happening. Maybe a little disturbing, maybe this is weird. I'm talking to strangers, but now something strange is starting to happen, and what do I do? How do we handle this? What's the next thing to do? Go talk to a trusted friend. That's a great thing. He goes and, let's talk to Andrew. And then, of course, better better than that, the two friends together talk to the best friend, Jesus. What do? These folks want to see you. What would you have us to do? And Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it. But he who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. If anyone serves me, then let him follow me. And where I am, there you'll be my servant. If anyone serves me, the Father also will recognize and honor and appreciate him. And so, in those verses, there's so much that can be said. You know, I was telling some of you when I got up here late, I'm always a little bit late, it seems like, or at least later than I thought I was going to be. And I think that somehow if I say something, I have an excuse or whatever. I've always got a reason, even if it's not an excuse. But I was saying to her this morning, I found myself so caught up in the stuff that I'm sharing with you, I just, got transported, so to speak. And suddenly woke up to the fact that, oh my goodness, it's almost 10:30. I got to get in there and share with my friends the things that I'm seeing, the things that I'm looking at. But there's so much here that it can't possibly be seen or said in the course of the time that we have. But just bear this in mind. The central question, for all that is there in those red letters, the central request was, we want to see Jesus. And so keeping that in mind, that's what we see here. Here's how. How do you see Jesus? How do you get to have that vision of him that's like, wow, this is heavenly. I can get so lost in this that even the pain and suffering and hardship, it's not as much in my face the way it was. Even waiting is a lot easier. Time flies when you're having a good time, so to speak. Where's the good time? Where's the good face? Where's the good vision? How do we see Jesus? That's what's being answered here. And the first part, in accordance with what Jesus said, is that he has to be glorified. The first thing he said there, they said, we wish to see Jesus, and he says, no, I must be glorified. It's, again, back in verse 16. These things his disciples didn't understand. Even this big parade and all this happening, Jesus riding on that young donkey, they didn't understand. They didn't really see it. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things to him. And they was like, oh, yeah, now I see. Something wonderful already happened. I just didn't realize how wonderful it was at the time. Now, through memory, I see more clearly. And now my vision of the future has changed. Because now I've got a true glimpse of what happened. Of what wonderful things I've already witnessed. But the need was that Jesus would be glorified. And probably for them, like for us, when first somebody talks about something being glorious or being glorified, my first thought is always something like the Mount of Transfiguration. His face shone like the sun, his garments white as light. Whoa! Who could miss it? Almost blinding. Glory! Did you see the glory? And yet I think the fact is that for most of us, glory can hit us right upside the head and we wouldn't even know. Or at least glory could be sitting right next to us. In the same room, an opportunity to see something glorious. And again, so often we miss it. And when Jesus says, I'm going to be glorified, it's in the context of the humble coat and the thorny crown and the rugged cross. That's the glory. Yes, there is a raising and an ascension and all of the hope that assures us that this seeming tragedy was in fact a very glorious thing. The resurrection and the ascension, those are glorious, but the glory begins here. That's the glory he's talking about. It's the glory that's there in all 7 of those sayings from the cross. It's the glory that begins with that first saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's the beginning of the glory. That's a glory that, God help us, we can enter into. The glory of forgiveness. The glory of seeing beyond what others just don't see. The glory of understanding what others just don't seem to understand. And rather than be all bothered that they're not appreciating it, to appreciate it ourselves and say, this is good. There's something glorious going on even here. He says in verse 23, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. These Gentiles want to see Jesus. Jesus says, well, it won't be long now. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then that word, truly, truly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself, alone. But if it dies, it bears a lot of fruit. All of the fruit, all that heavenly fruit. But none of it comes unless first of all the seed is buried in the earth. And Jesus, of course, he's the picture. Jesus is the perfect seed, the perfect humanity, the perfect human genome in a soul sense, in a spiritual sense. He's the Alpha and Omega. He's the perfect alphabet. He's the perfect sequence. He's the perfect seed. But like the seeds that we deal with every day, all the time, we understand that no matter how perfect that seed may be for whatever kind of plant it may be, until it's planted, all you see is something that doesn't look like much more than a pebble, like a rock. It's nothing to be applauded. It's nothing you can even appreciate. Yet, hardly know. And on this one time when Jesus chose to make a public display of himself, getting on this colt, everyone missed it. He puts on a show and people are looking to see something else. That's why he says, until I go through this, and until we ourselves choose to go through a similar course, you cannot see. If we had aliens from another planet, I was driving my middle granddaughter home last night, and along with a lot of riddles and jokes and other games that you play when you're driving along the way, she was doing these different things about what would happen if an alien saw us doing this, what would they think? If an alien came from outer space and saw us doing that, and so I got a lot of those in my head right now, but I'm not going to give you all of those. But it primed my heart for this one. If an alien were to come to us and say, we wish to see the source of your energy and health. We see your bodies. We want to see how you sustain your body. We wish to see the source of your life and health. We might show them a seed. And if we showed them a seed, they might think, these earthlings are crazier than we thought. You're saying that one little thing there's millions, there's billions of you. No wonder so many are starving. You got this one little seed. You say it's a perfect seed, but we don't see it. And of course, if a little bit of time, amazing what time does to really see things. Over the course of time, if they could see countless harvests that could come from just one seed, being reinvested over and over and over, countless fields of grain that could feed countless people. And we know it could all start with just that one seed. Jesus is that. And that's the beauty of who he is. But just as a seed needs to be placed into the dirt for it to truly be seen, so Jesus needed to be buried beneath our dirt and filth and shame and manure and all of that stuff. And Jesus didn't take it personally. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They're burying me. They're putting me to death and they're burying me. They don't understand what they're doing, but he understood. He knew this is the way. Love invested. Love allowing others to be as failed as they are. And not trying to just change them and force them to be something that they're not, but just loving them as they are. And being buried beneath their deadness and blindness, their dirt. And yet, that's the display. that's the greatest display of power. Because the greatest display of love is no greater love than one lays down their life for their friends. And so it's a picture. But not just a picture, it's a path, it's a course, it's a way to live. You can't hold on to it anymore. You let it go every day. You take the good you've been given, especially the things of love, and then in love you let those things go and you keep investing it. And no greater display could have ever been made than the one that was made there upon the cross. So first of all, he has to do that. He has to show this is how much you're loved. This is what I'm willing to do. This is, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. This is how much your Father loves you. That's number one. He lays down his life for his friends. But the next thing is we've got to become his friends. He's already made it clear. I want to have a relationship with you. But just like that lame guy that we saw a few chapters back, do you want to get well? Do you really want to get well? Then you have to. And a friend is somebody that says, you know what, I'm not going to fight you on where we're going today. I just want to go where you go because we're friends. I want to share life with you. I want to go through life with you. You decide, with my life, I want to invest it and I want to do things the way Jesus did. And if you do as he did, then you'll see him. To see what love is, you have to do what love does. And then it's like, oh, now I get it. But it's not something on paper, it's not something in a classroom, it's just living it. It's the simple things that so many of you have done so many times already. You've witnessed so many wonderful things and you may not even have noticed or remembered it. I encourage you to remember. Remember every place where you've been loved, every place where you've felt love and given love and known love. Those were glorious things. You may not have noticed it at the time, but you've already seen and experienced so much glory. And that's a picture of the future that's coming. Because those are the places where it's been invested in you and you've invested in others. And that's the idea. Jesus says in verse 25, he who loves his life loses it. And of course the context is loves his life in this world. Remember, all that's in this world is lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, boast of pride of life. It's just lust, boast. And it doesn't matter which game board you play. You can play a church game or you can play a business game, Wall Street, wherever. It's where you just live for lust, boast. That's just a total dead end. And if you love that game, if you love all of the lust, boast world, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. If you want my advice, nobody else seems to want my advice, at least the Pharisees didn't ask for it. But my advice is, give up on that, because it's never going to make you happy or satisfied. I think most of you already agree with me. You probably wouldn't be here if you didn't, but that's the good news, is that you don't have to be worried about getting out of this world or what we get out of the world. Like we talked about last week, those who get the most out of life aren't those who stuff the most things into life. They're the ones who tap into life and get the most out of life. And so, to do what love does, you're not loving your life in this world. It says, he who loves his life in this world will lose it. But he who hates his life in this world shall keep it to life eternal. Like Jesus. Don't be afraid to ride the untamed donkey. Don't be afraid to just sit in that place where people all the more may not appreciate you. People all the more may not see who you really are. But like Jesus, who chose to ride it, I encourage you. I think in going through this world, you will enjoy the ride a whole lot better. You may not be greatly appreciated or applauded, but I think you'll enjoy the ride of this life a whole lot more if you just ride the untamed donkey. And just sit there because you're sitting next to a true friend. Someone who truly does appreciate you. And you'll get so much out of life because God has poured so much of himself into it. And it's all around us. I have to say, I love my life. And the more I tap into it, the more I recall what it was, the best things, rather than get all bothered about the things that they really were a waste in many ways. But I look back at things of love, and I love my life. And that doesn't make me afraid to die. In fact, the closer I get to the end of my parade, we used to always talk, we're in the last days, we're in the last days. Well, by golly, I know that more and more so. But rather than panic, don't be afraid. The closer I get to the end of the parade, the more I can say, I have loved my life. And I've got a little bit of a glimpse of what's coming next. More and more. Again, Jesus said, verse 25, he who loves his life loses it. I love my life. And you know what? I am losing it. Every day. But I'm not sad about that. My life in this world is a little bit less every day. But I'm excited. Losing your life is not about pain and suffering. Because you know what? Everyone goes through pain and suffering. Christians, non-Christians, Greeks, Gentiles, Serbians, male, female, Scythians, who else can I name? Doesn't matter who. Pain and suffering is a part of life. For some people, way more than others. Maybe we help them. Because pain and suffering is no fun. And we're not called to pain and suffering. We're called to a life that's so vibrant and satisfying that in spite of pain and suffering, we can continue to love our life. Not our life in this world, but we can love the life that God has given to us and hold on to it forever. Loving, investing in people, investing in your family and your friends and your neighbors and those close enough to where your caring counts. And like the picture that Jesus has painted and shows for us here, in your life, if in any way you feel you feel bothered that maybe the things you've done have gone unnoticed, or maybe the best you've done has been not only unseen, but maybe it's been covered by a lot of dirt. Maybe it's been misseen, misunderstood. Maybe like Mary, people would even rebuke you for the choices you've made. But if you know you've made loving choices, you have done well. Keep it up. Don't be disturbed by what others see or what goes unseen. If it's invested in love, it lives. Even if it seems to be dead, it lives. Those seeds, they all live. They're going to come back. You're going to see those things, that love, those relationships in the future. Look back. Interesting thing about a parade. You're seated in the bandstand, wherever that may be, but all you see is what's happening in front of you. If you could have a more heavenly view, you can see it from beginning to the end, and you know that we end up in the same place, but what plane do we live on? And how do we enjoy the place we're at, even where we're at right now? So I encourage you folks today, if it's the only day you got right now, look back at wherever you've loved and been loved, and be grateful for that, and be thankful for that, and rejoice in that. And then look ahead to the harvest. Because so much more is going to come out of that. Because those were just the seeds. And for me, it's easy. Even when it's hard. If I live this way. And when I live this way, it almost seems too easy. It's like, oh, this is just too good. But it's only what love has produced. I didn't force my wife to marry me, and I didn't force her to stay with me. She's never held a shotgun to my head. But we've had struggles and we've had difficulties, and it's just life. We started out as friends, and then we messed everything up by getting married. And we thought so many times but thankfully, fortunately, thank God, however it happened, we've stayed and continued to love, and we've been together. And in our lives, it's resulted in a couple of wonderful kids, and then 5 wonderful grandkids now. And that's just a physical family. but it's a visible fruit of what love does in whatever relationships you invested in. And right after a year and a half where we couldn't see, or just couldn't be face to face and hang out with 3 of our grandkids, now we're making up for lost time and getting grandkids and shuttling them back and forth these next couple of weeks. And this, like I said, I was sitting there a couple of days ago, just watching the 3 younger grandchildren playing, watching how they got along and watching how they related. I had some nice George Winston piano music. Everything just so. This is heaven. I'm just watching them and seeing, and it's like, where did these kids come from? The heavenly things I see didn't come from me, but they came to me and through me, and it was just beautiful. And I just sat there, I watched the girls, they're playing dolls, and we have those Barbie stuff that came from a yard sale friend, So we got all, and then I built something a few years ago that hadn't had a chance to see the girls really enjoy it. And these 2 girls are 4 and they're 7 and 10 years old. So they're just a place where they can enjoy doing all the Barbie, but not with Barbie. They use all kinds of different animals and things. But it's a playhouse and doing all the, the little boy, the little 4-year-old boy, he's there, and of course, the girls are doing all this thing, oh, how do you look? Oh, you look marvelous. Let's go shopping over here. And he's over there, going, look, Barbies, soccer balls in her toilet, stuck in there, and little baby tigers go potty up on the roof, and he's just throwing out all kinds of boy stuff. And they're tolerating it. And finally, I said, come on over here. Sit next to me. I'm sitting in my captain's chair. I have a swivel rocker I got about 15 years ago. It always reminds me of Captain Kirk, captain's chair. I'm sitting there in my captain's chair. I said, come on over here, Lincoln. He's got some little Legos, Avengers Legos. He's putting the things there. Why don't you just do some of the stuff that you like, or let the girls just not have Barbie's dream house get an overflow toilet for a little while. They weren't complaining. Come over here, just play over here. So he's playing over here, and I'm watching it, and I'm just like, this is heaven. This is just so sweet. All the grown-ups are gone. I'm supposed to be the only grown-up in the room, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching, and I'm just thinking, this is heaven. And the next thing I knew, it was heavenly. I didn't die, but I fell asleep. And then the next thing I know is the Lincoln's grabbing me, waking me. Papa, you're supposed to be watching me. I rose from the bed. Yes, I'm watching it. But I'll always be watching them. My loved ones, even when I leave here, even when my part of the parade passes, I'll be and I know those who love me. I believe that. I think that's part of heaven. You're saying you don't see the fruit? You don't see the pain and suffering. Thank God that's going to get dealt with. But you see the fruit. And there are those who are watching who are blessed by the choices you're making and who are caring for you that don't make these other choices. Don't waste your life in this world by loving your life in this world. Keep investing your life. And I'll always be watching. Because heaven's never that far. And family, love, the connections. And there's pain. There's wrong turns. There's prodigality. But you know what? Love goes on forever. All the rest of that stuff is passive. Just keep hoping and rejoicing, and don't wait for heaven. And certainly don't wait to die before you start to live. Let's close with this song.
There's no doubt many beautiful and glorious things that we've not yet noticed. Still are moments, still are memories, to those places where love has happened. And if, Lord, we feel tempted to just feel sad, Those people are gone, that time is gone. That living thing got buried beneath some dirt somewhere. Lord, help us to again be hopeful, to love that, guys. Those good things are just a foretaste of the better things. Lord, thank you for coming and showing us what true power is, how it works, and where it is that we might truly see you and truly be happy. Lord, thanks for the opportunity that you give us today. Let's all stand.
Thank you.